Krisha, and I finally have a complete combiner. This is Combiner Wars Bruticus, more specifically Combiner Wars Onslaught and 4 knockoffs. Unfortunately, because I didn't collect at the time, I didn't buy the figures when they were still on the shelves, and their current aftermarket prices are just awful. Luckily, these are the High G Xing knockoffs, which means they are of fairly high quality, almost comparable to genuine Hasbro figures. Now, I got them without the KO boxes, so I unfortunately can't share with you the hilarious English on them, but we can at least read the instructions. Tip: some parts, such as excessive force, will be discharged. Can be reinstalled by adult, if needed. You may need support to perform certain positions. Products and colors may vary. Please keep this instruction for future reference. Taekong Jans, cool become brave. Alright, that was adorable. Now let's get to the actual toys themselves. We'll start with Onslaught. Ideally I would save him for last because he's the biggest, but since we have a legit one and a knockoff at hand, he'll be a great baseline for comparison. I'm actually really lucky that I already had a real Onslaught because the quality on this KO is by far the worst of the gang, I'm afraid. A lot of the parts don't quite line up, those feet do not tap together, and the plastic quality is quite a bit worse than the original. Bit of a disclaimer though, the KO is missing a piece, not that it didn't come with it, I just gave it to the original since that one was second hand and came without it, but now I can't get it back off. But how does the toy stand as a vehicle, design-wise? Well, Onslaught is a retool of Hotspot, so there are naturally some compromises. Onslaught turns into a nondescript long vehicle with some guns on top of it, which looks fine I suppose, not realistic or anything, but it is somewhat decent. Tell you what though, the more you look at it, the more it falls apart. Like those teeny tiny double cockpits at the front, barely concealing the gap between the robot mode shoulders, the blatant gap under what is clearly just Bruticus' head in some casing, all of this junk which is just combiner kibble, or the back which is straight up reused Fat Truck bits from Hotspot. Luckily, Swindle's vehicle mode fares much better. I'm not sure what exactly it's meant to be, since it doesn't quite look like a Jeep, Humvee, or any other similar military vehicle, but he has a roll bar and a lot of sci-fi greebling, and that's fun. He does have this peg poking out from the middle of his roof, which is a bit unsightly, but jam the included gun on top of it and bam, it's a weapon station. Shame that the robot mode is a bit naked in there, with the fists poking out, and the biceps and back of the head just hanging out right there in the open. Moving on to the second leg, Brawl is actually a very nice tank. For all the flaws this figure has, the look of the vehicle mode is definitely not one of them. It's just nice and chunky, perhaps a bit too flat, but this is a deluxe class figure, so it's obviously limited in size. His treads are nicely picked out. They don't work or anything, but he's a combiner limp with effectively 4 modes, so I don't think it would be physically possible to make them work. He does have those tiny wheels, but these are mostly for show. His turret looks very nice with the cannon, which can be angled up and down. The turret itself is on a double hinge, but sadly can't rotate, which is a pretty big disappointment. Just one extra piece would have allowed it to spin freely, but I guess then it would expose the robot head even more than it is when you lift the cannon even slightly. My favorite detail about him is at the front though, with those painted on PT headlights and the tiniest Decepticon logo I've ever seen. Now, Vortex is a bit odd. He transforms into a helicopter, but this helicopter is sketchy to say the least. Like, the cockpit looks fairly snazzy, and so does the tail end, but they are separated by 2 miles of nondescript nothing. The rotor is nice, but I think it should have had 4 blades. What really brings the figure down though are the rocket pods. It's one thing to have the arms just hanging out on the sides, unconcealed. Budgets are a thing, and he's a Combiner Wars Deluxe, so there are limits to his engineering, but did you have to make the rockets bright yellow? It's not even G1 accurate, unless you count the tiny yellow stickers on the toy's arms, but this definitely is a detail that should have been left out. But like, this is not an attack helicopter. He's an Alpha Bravo retool, so he just looks like a dweeby civilian heli with some garish rockets stuck to its sides. There's a butterfly in my room, what the hell? I'm filming a review here! Last but certainly not least then is Blast Off. He's probably my favorite of the deluxes. In vehicle mode, the first thing you'll notice is that he is no longer a shuttle. There is a dual explanation for this. Firstly, he is a Combiner Wars Deluxe, and there were like 5 reshelled base molds in that whole line, so making him a shuttle was probably off the charts. But secondly, I actually think a jet fits in way better with the other Combaticons. Space shuttles are not known for their combat abilities, and like, have you seen that scale meme? These things are huge. Anyway, back to the figure itself. Blastoff's new alt mode is a sexier Harrier alike, with the wings and tail stabilizers having that signature droop. It's not entirely a Harrier, with everything looking just a touch more swept back, but still a pleasing little pumpy plane. I really like his purple Seeker stripes, shame they don't continue all the way along the wings. Now, of course, being an aerial bot recolor, he does have quite a bit of undercarriage. His arms are nakedly visible from the top, but honestly, he doesn't get me jazzed up nearly as much as Vortex. They blend in fairly well and visually just become some extra chong. And I mean, it's not the worst cable management on a jet. In vehicle modes, the Combaticons make for a good and fairly threatening looking unit. I really enjoy them, but being vehicles is the third most important thing that a Combiner team does. Let's do the robots. Getting back to Onslaught, he is a fine looking Voyager. These shoulders are a bit droopy, so I personally like to angle them one click up. I'm a fan of the chest detailing, and that head sculpt is absolute killer. He's a bit odd from the knees down though, since once again, these pieces are straight up taken from Hotspot, and they even include the sirens, which are for some reason painted so that you cannot miss them. At least they gave him different feet. Turning him around, you can see that he's heaving a mighty backpack consisting of all the Bruticus parts. I like that all the Combiner kibble is contained on him, other than the hand food guns. It's way better like this and you won't lose it, but it is a bit unsightly. To once again compare the KO and the real deal, you can see that the knockoff has some color differences. What was silver is now blue, and some parts are now black. Some of his joints are tighter and feel nicer, some are too tight. The plastic is a bit shinier and has more noticeable warbles, but the weight is about the same. Unfortunately, the KO is mismolded. Those leg extender struts do not clip into the knees. Funnily enough, Haiji Xing did include an insignia on all their figures, but it is a weird W instead of an actual symbol. Anyway, onto a much higher quality KO. Swindle is a very fine figure. He's probably a bit too broad for a Swindle. The little bastard should be small and diminutive, but he still looks pleasant, so I don't care. The head sculpt is cute, but a bit dark, and it really needed a sly smirk. The torso, dominated by the combiner peg, is very broad and very purple, with classic headlight nipples. It's funny though how he has a fake bumper on his chest, when the real bumper of the vehicle mode looks nothing like this. Anywho, he's nice and articulated, although the right shoulder of mine is very floppy, and the left thigh swivel would rather fall apart than rotate. Interestingly, his backpack may stick out egregiously, but honestly, holding him in person, it doesn't really look that bad. Brawl is probably the worst robot mode out of every figure I own. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoy the transformation scheme, and elements of him are really fun, but just look at him. He's just the wrong shape. But starting with the things I do enjoy, his head and shoulders look very nice, and the legs are very nice stompers. Problem is, everything in between is just kinda awful. He just has no belly. His tank tee looks nice, and the waist block has a nice sculpt, but the cavity in between is just inexcusable. The stabs stopping the transformation hinge should just not have been there, or at least they should have been placed differently. And unfortunately, that's not the only awful part of him. Those forearms are just pitifully stubby, making him look frankly ridiculous. But at least the turret fits onto the back nice and snugly. Moving on to Vortex, who unfortunately has quite a big QC issue. The tabs holding his legs together are ridiculously tight, and even after I file them down a bit, I still worry about snapping something. Other than that, he is a fine, if a bit bland looking figure. The red and yellow on his torso is in theory a nice homage to his G1 toy, but in practice it makes him look, once again, just that bit more tacky. His kibble management is decent. I like the cockpit feet, although the rotor should have been on at least a double hinge. But other than that and the decent head sculpt, he's just a bit bland. Just an ordinary looking lanky robot. Definitely not what you would call a killing machine. Finally, once again, we have Blastoff, looking absolutely fantastic in taupe and platinet. His broad shoulders make him look muscular, or at least as muscular as an airplane robot can look, without looking overly buff. His head sculpt is very nice, although the lips make him look a bit like a stuffy child. But the torso looks great, and the legs are lovely too. He does have flaws, like the wings hinging a bit too far out, or the lack of ankle and wrist articulation, but for a deluxe class Jetformer combiner limb, he is about as perfect as you will get. Now, all the deluxes come with these hand-foot guns, also these two guns, one of which is Blastoff's and the other Vortex's, but I put them in a box and now I have no idea which is which. The hand-foot gun is an elegant idea for solving the combiner conundrum. It really means you can get any 4 deluxes and use them as complete limbs for a combiner, and I really love how the thumb can twist to either side so it can be a proper left or right hand. But here's the problem. Feet are big, or at least big compared to hands, so in effect you end up with a robot who has enormous hands and tiny feet at the same time. And the gun mode is... it's a cute notion, but it just looks daft in the hands of a deluxe, or even a Voyager honestly. It just looks daft. But alright, checkpoint. Are you still with me? Hit me with that thumbs up if you're still with me, because it's time for the main event, the combination.
When I took my time to see this movie. About Venom. What is it, one of the worst superhero movies? Kind of a hard comparison to make because it's just garbage tier. Understand how dumb it is. Like Quicksilver, but who's from
Garfield onset as his character from the
in the last movie will not be reprised. Video of Andrew Garfield is fake. That seems to be written by AI. Happens, we can figure it out here.
The Amazing Spider-Man. There's a pretty big difference between
Quality on the face work is by compressing and then basically saying
Crisp shadow under your nose from the sunlight. There's a bit of a sense of like his face is being. So that's because the computer's training on a bunch of images around. It's really, really, really good.
As you can see, I'm on the set of Man Who Acts Like a Spy. This gives your data additional encryption with access to certain movie titles that are only bad guys. And the second Netflix in an entirely different this shot. See you guys later.
First thing I'm seeing is
And here we have Bruticus in his awesome looking combine mode. It does have plenty of issues, but to be honest, I don't really care for most of them. Like the guns on his back are a bit undersized because they tried to scale them to Onslaught's robot mode. The arms are quite a bit too long and the shoulder articulation is pretty limited, but none of that takes away from the amazingness of this thing. Of course, being a combiner, he's fairly large, but not really to the point of towering over everything. But regardless of his size, Bruticus just has a presence like only 5 vehicles stuck together can have. Of course, Swindle and Brawl undergo minimal transformation compared to vehicle mode, but they make for very nice broad stompers. Blastoff as the right arm looks amazing, although I think the nose cone could have stuck out a bit higher up. It would have made him more even with Vortex's tail rotor, which looks like a dominant shoulder pad, but unfortunately it is a bit marred by once again those garish yellow rockets. Vortex's arms don't really have anywhere to go in arm mode, and if you leave them tabbed in, they get in the way of the elbow. Onslaught's backpack elegantly unfurls into Bruticus's chest and head, and oh baby, he is beautiful! His head is perhaps a bit too uneven with its neutral eyes, and it's not silver, which may put off some people, but I like it. The raised shoulders are also a sticking point to some apparently, but I actually think this is a great design element, making him look much bulkier than Defensor or other mold mates of Onslaught. The silver chestplate and codpiece accentuate his width nicely, and I really like how the wings lock the shoulders together, so they don't flop around. The KO actually can't do it since it's missing the grooves. More reason for me to be happy to have already had Onslaught. One thing the codpiece also brings to attention is that he has a very short torso. His hips are like halfway up the double elbow, which is definitely not an element you would find on actual human anatomy, but it makes him once again look broad and strong. His articulation is awesome too. Those combiner pegs are a genius piece of engineering. It actually makes me sad to see that a lot of people display their gestalts in just this boring base pose. Just moving the ratchet one click back would look so much cooler and more dynamic. And you've got double jointed elbows! What's unfortunate about his articulation though is the hips. At least on my copy, Onslaught's hip ratchets are ever so slightly tilted, so Bruticus always just leans forward or back awkwardly, unless I finagle with the joints. If you can't tell, I'm really loving Combiner Wars Bruticus, and I'm thinking of getting other figures to mess about with. Combiner Wars was just an amazing idea for a toy line, bringing back the Scramble City Combiner system, updating it with awesome articulation and proportions, and making it the entire focus of the line. Other than the leaders and some of the Legends figures, everybody took part in combining, being a limb, torso, or accessory. But unfortunately there are considerable drawbacks. There is a lot of requirements placed on every figure. The deluxes have 4 modes, and they all need to be the same length in leg and arm modes, which greatly limited the engineering possible, and ultimately meant we had to deal with endless retools and reshells. Then Power of the Primes ran out of steam with this idea, and the only new molds we got were the Dinobots, and their retools, the Terracoms, and Moonracer and Jazz, who were notoriously rubbish. It's nice they finally managed to make a car former with the classic car bumper chestbot, but at what cost? But I'll stop my ramblings. Thank you so much for watching, and if you subscribe, I will see you with another video. Next time, 6 elemental heroes will wash ashore. Bye! in the window, sunning herself because it's hot outside. Hello. She's going out of focus because I don't have autofocus.